Please consider supporting Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. You can learn more about them at bwunited.ca. They are always looking for donations and volunteers. So please, again, support Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. Again, that website is bwunited.ca.
This is Dmitry Samarov from Chicago, Illinois, and I love listening to Vish Khanna's Creative Control because whether he's talking to a favorite musician or actor of mine or someone I've never heard of, it's as if he's introducing me to a new friend. And the way things are going, couldn't you use a new friend? Listen now.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol today.
David Grubbs and Jim O'Rourke are each hugely influential and talented musicians who first began collaborating on music in the early 1990s in the city of Chicago, Illinois. An esteemed author and professor who currently lives in Brooklyn, New York, Grubbs hails from Louisville, Kentucky, and was a driving force as a guitarist, lyricist, and vocalist in punk bands like Squirrelbait and Bastro, the latter of which morphed into the quieter project Gastr del Sol. Now based in Japan, O'Rourke was a key figure in Chicago's improvised music, jazz, and underground rock communities in the 1990s, where he engineered and produced records and played with all manner of people from every known musical genre in the universe. He was an active member of Sonic Youth in the early part of this century, and his relatively pop-oriented song-based solo albums for Drag City are some of the most beloved in that label's catalog. O'Rourke joined Grubbs in Gastr del Sol, and the pair recorded some stunning music together until they disbanded in 1998. On May 24th, 2024, Drag City released a 3-LP box set of rare or otherwise unreleased Gastr del Sol live and studio recordings. It's called We Have Dozens of Titles, and its release prompted David and Jim to join me for a wonderful talk about things like comedy, Albert Brooks, and Robert Smigel. The hunt for these aforementioned live recordings, which stem from a Canadian Gastr del Sol concert that wound up being their final show. How and why they first met and began working together, memories of what life in Chicago was like for them, how Gastr del Sol inspired other musicians, including Jim Guthrie, why Gastr del Sol ended, Jim referencing a Sonic Youth poster in my office and describing his work with those guys on the wall, how David and Jim began communicating again, what's next for Gastr del Sol, other future plans, and much more. Now part of the Lionsgate Sound Network, with the support of listeners like you who follow and subscribe to this listener-supported and donor-driven podcast. Spread the word about it, leave nice reviews and ratings on your podcast platform, and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/creativecontrol, which is the primary and most reliable way for podcasters just like me to make some kind of living. Now, all amounts are welcome, of course. So there's different tiers. If you go to the Patreon page there, you'll see there's different tiers. But a $6 monthly subscription means you can access every single episode of this show in its entirety since we launched this new initiative. And that's not the case without that subscription. Without that subscription, you get, like I say, you get every other episode free and clear, pretty much. But without it, you will only hear little excerpts of certain episodes. So, again, all amounts are welcome if you can afford to and you feel inclined to support me and my work. This is my primary job these days. But $6 is that key. Then you get everything, and you can learn more about all of this at patreon.com/creativecontrol. Thank you in advance for your support, or thank you right now if you currently support the show. It means a lot. With additional support from Blackbird Music, a wonderful record store with bricks and mortar locations in Edmonton and Calgary, Alberta, and a great website, blackbird.ca, where you can find whatever it is you're looking for, I'm sure. Say you want a copy of, we have dozens of titles by Gastr del Sol. Well, go to blackbird.ca, type it in, and if you can't make it to Edmonton or Calgary, Alberta, don't fret. They'll ship it right to your house. It's just that simple. Plus, in-kind support from independent businesses like Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, respectively, in Guelph, Ontario, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario. This is episode 877 of Creative Control, featuring the lovely and talented David Grubbs and Jim O'Rourke from Gastr del Sol, with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hi, David. How's it going?
Hey, going quite well. Yourself?
I'm well, thank you. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in Brooklyn. I'm in the Clinton Hill neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Oh, nice. How are things going there generally, would you say?
Generally going fine. Little hot and humid today. Little taste of what summer has in store. But, yeah, quite okay with me.
How long have you been in Brooklyn, David?
25 years.
Oh, okay.
I moved here in the summer of '99.
Oh, nice. Well, that's great. Well, I'm glad you're here. It's an honor to meet you. I think we've had some interactions on Twitter. I'll get to this in a moment because it's relevant to this release. I feel like you might not even know what I'm talking about, but I will bring it up as we go. Also on the line, Jim, are you there?
Hello. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again, sir. How are you?
I'm getting there. I've been awake for 15 minutes, so I'm okay.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, yeah, just for people listening, where in the world are you today, Jim?
I am in Hokutoshi, which is the equivalent of the Alps in Japan.
Nice. And so, as I'm speaking to you, it's 6:06 p.m. on a Sunday. What day and time is it there?
It's Monday, 9 a.m. here.
Okay.
I'm in the future.
How are things in the future? Is there anything we need to know, Jim?
It still exists. So you've got a few hours left at least.
You never know what's going to happen, except you might. You might know what's going to happen compared to me and David. Yeah. Well, it's nice to talk to you again. I feel like
you too.
When did we chat last? We talked about, I don't know, was it 8 years ago?
It would be about 8 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. I have a fondness for that conversation, and it's nice to have you back with me. I was going to say back on the show, but you weren't really on the show, as I recall.
No, I didn't know what podcasts were then.
Yeah, it's good. Do you listen now? Do you know what they are?
I do know what they are. I occasionally listen to Conan O'Brien's, but only like the YouTube clips of his podcast. But other than that, I don't really listen to them, but I know of them.
Yeah. You know who I had on in December, and it was a huge thrill, was Robert Smigel. Do you know Robert Smigel?
Oh, sure. He's brilliant.
Yeah. He's one of my all-time comedic heroes.
His very short-run show, I don't know if you've seen this, David, TV Funhouse. Was it? No, it wasn't called... The show wasn't TV Funhouse, was it?
No, he had a segment on Saturday Night Live. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what it...
Sorry, I didn't mean to alienate...
That's right.
I didn't mean to alienate David. David, are you familiar with Robert Smigel?
I'm not, but I'm learning.
Robert Smigel is a comedic writer and performer. He used to be on Saturday Night Live as a regular writer back in the late 80s to mid-90s. And he left to work on the Dana Carvey show, which was short-lived on ABC. But then he would come back to SNL to do a segment he called TV Funhouse. It was animated. It was cartoons. It was cartoons for adults, I guess, and music.
And he was the first writer when Conan started his show.
That's right.
He was the head writer.
That's right. He was the head writer.
But what was the show? You know what I'm talking about? It was only 6 episodes.
Yes, I know the one you mean, and I'm blanking on the name of it. It might have had something to do with.
But it's something like TV Funhouse. It's an imitation of kids shows from the morning.
Yeah, you're
and it's insane. It's insane. And I actually went to the show in Brooklyn. No, in Manhattan. They did a live version of the show once.
Oh.
And, with David, you probably know Triumph. You know, the dog puppet that's basically Don
the
Rickles?
comic insult
The
dog.
insult comic dog, yeah.
And that's Robert Smigel.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
him.
gotcha.
That's him. And what happened was I gave a nice review to this film he made with Adam Sandler recently, Leo, kids movie, and he liked the review so much that he shared it all over the place and he tagged me on all the things. And I reached out and said, Robert, you know, you're a hero of mine. Would you care to be on the show? And he said yes. It was remarkable. But in the course of the show, he's like, I wouldn't normally do a show like this. I'm like, what? he turned into triumph just for a moment. Anyway, I love that we have these comedic connections as well. And I'm going to go back to what I was saying, David, that was relevant to this release, which, before I go much further, congratulations. Congratulations on this release.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
What had occurred I don't know when you started working on this. At some point in your life, David, were you trying to hunt down a CBC live recording in the last 8-9 years?
I certainly was. Maybe over the course of like 2 or almost 3 years before somebody located it in an archive in Montreal.
Yeah.
Did I contact you about it? Because I feel like I was asking Canadian friends of Canadian friends and, you know, casting a wide net.
What had occurred was you tweeted that you were looking for it, and our mutual friend Steve Albini, I used to work for the CBC, and I think he long associated me with it, many years after I'd left, said, Vish, can you help David? So I did try, and I wrote back, yeah, I'll try, and I called my old colleagues who I thought might know, a fellow named James out in Vancouver, and he said, well, I can try, but they didn't, nothing panned out. And I may have written back eventually to be like, sorry, guys, I tried, I couldn't do it.
Right.
But beyond the fact that Steve thought to connect us, you found it. I mean, the celebratory aspect is did you find the recording you were looking for? I think you did.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the person who found it. I'm spacing on the person who actually laid their hands on it. But
was it Brave New Waves? Is that?
Yeah, so a big chunk of that recording was played on Brave New Waves in 1997. Yeah.
So the host would likely have been Patty Schmidt. Do you remember that?
She's someone who I was in contact with.
Yeah, she's a friend of mine. I haven't talked to her in many years, but we used to play hockey together in a hockey and arts league. Good time hockey league of the arts. So all the music nerds and the magazine writers would play hockey, and some of us were okay, but a lot of us, not that great.
But how are your hockey skills?
I used to play minor hockey as a kid, and I just assumed once I'd forgotten about hockey, I'd never play again. Then in your 20s, you find you're playing hockey again. It was really fun. I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. I don't much follow the sport now. I follow basketball because the culture of hockey is too violent and odd, and there's lots of, it gets ugly, actually, the more you delve into it. However, at the time, it was really fun. And Patty, remarkable. She was great. Great hockey player. So just a little Canadian content for you guys. Hockey.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Anyway, no, it's great. So this is what you found is now part of We Have Dozens of Titles. Is that a way of putting it, David?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah, it's the majority of the new material. So I guess there's about 50 minutes of unreleased material, live material, and the majority of that comes from that final concert that we did in Victoriaville in 1997.
It's very remarkable that I didn't realize how pivotal a piece of a document, rather, you were looking for, the final concert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jim, when you first heard this final concert, had you heard it back when it was recorded? Did you ever hear it back then? Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. What did you make of it when you heard it?
Well, when I got it I was already in the midst of kind of fixing up all the other tracks. So I kind of like listen in a different mode when I'm doing that. So I was sort of like in pure technical mode. So I was kind of just in my head trying to it was like, okay, what are we using on this? Oh, and sort of like picturing, I had a picture of the stage. David, am I right in remembering that at that same fest I did a duo with Gunter Mueller?
No, at that festival you played in a trio with Lee Ranaldo and William Hooker, I think.
That was that one?
Yeah, and we also went to Montreal. one night with John Abbey and Ben Ratliff to go see KG Hino play solo.
Oh, wow.
Right. Okay, that makes sense because that was just like, oh wait, not Lee, but Mr. Hooker just grabbed me by the arm before they went on stage or sound check and said, "You're playing with us," and that's why I have the Farfisa. Okay.
Huh.
Yeah, because that wasn't like the plan. They were supposed to be playing a duo at the fest.
Yeah, that is correct. I do remember that.
And also they brought in the sax player Johnny Jebbia, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's that. So that's the year. Okay, it must have been the year before, the year after that I played with Gunter.
Huh.
Probably a year before. Okay, but anyway, I was kind of just thinking, what gear am I using?
Yeah.
I mean, it was, yeah. So that sounds silly, but that's kind of what I was thinking about.
You guys are not the first people who I've encountered who, like, a piece of music that they made decades ago gets excavated, and then they almost have this objective perspective on it. It's like they didn't even make it. Like they don't remember making it. Sorry, I'm not saying that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no.
Did you have that sensation, David, as you went through this material of like, oh shit, I don't even remember doing this kind of thing?
It was kind of familiar, actually, because I had gotten a cassette dub of it from the people from the Victoriaville Festival a few months before that.
Oh, okay.
But my main recollection, though, when I was listening to the cassette of the cassette, was kind of like crossing fingers and toes, like I hope we don't fuck it up, because we'd gone through so many live cassettes in the year or two prior to that, thinking about things for the box set, where something starts pretty well and it's like, oh yeah, okay, I guess we're not using that, or the microphone is next to the sound desk and like two people like start having a conversation in the middle of the track or things like that. So yeah, it was like, yeah, I just hope it doesn't crash and burn. And yeah, it was just a huge relief that it was what it was.
Jim, it sounds like you had something of the experience I just described, sort of like...
I mean, I tend to be... I'm not very... Maybe David can help with this, what the correct word is. I kind of get in work mode very easily.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the task at hand? How do I get it done?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fair.
Yeah,
it's fair.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it might be nice for those who aren't as familiar with Gastr del Sol if we actually do a little dive into how this came together. Not just the new set, which is remarkable, but this union, because I think it's part of the story here, is you two coming together, making some music, separating, and this is something of a reconvention of sorts, I think. That's my read. But again, you're here. You can clear the air, correct the record, so to speak. David, can you give us a sense of how you and Jim kind of first met?
Yeah. I had moved to Chicago in 1990. Jim is from Chicago. Like every big city, Chicago's kind of a small town if you're playing experimental music. I think we'd been introduced to one another by John Corbett, who is a really good friend who is like a music freak, and I went to his radio show every week at the University of Chicago station. And yeah, I saw Jim play solo acoustic guitar, and in some other things probably organized by the composer Gene Coleman.
Yeah.
And Jim had heard the Serpentine Similar, which was the first Gastr del Sol record, which was the trio of me, John McEntire, and Bundy K. Brown. And yeah, Jim proposed that we play together, but in a different project. He didn't invite himself into Gastr del Sol, and I didn't yet invite him into Gastr del Sol. And yeah, we played as a sludgy quartet one afternoon with Tim Jones from Cheer Accident and Warren
Fisher.
Warren Fisher, yes, yeah.
Later of Fisher.
I wanted to say Warren Harding, yeah. And yeah, that was like pleasant but disastrous. I think that was more of a trial run for Breeze Glass, though. I mean, Jim can explain that. But yeah, I mean, immediately we were just like picking one another's brains and record collections, and before you knew it, Jim was playing in Gastr del Sol.
Did you? I appreciate that. I just want to follow up on something you said. You mentioned a radio show there. Did you say you went to a radio show every week?
Yes. Yeah. John Corbett hosted a show on WHPK, which is the University of Chicago station, called Radio Dada. And every Wednesday night he would come over and I would make dinner and we would play acoustic guitar, improvised duets for 20 minutes, and then realize that we were late for his show and, like rush over to the station and hang out for 3 hours while he did the show.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't before an audience. You had
no.
Special privileges.
Audience of one.
Did you ever have a show there, David?
No, I didn't. I did a show as an undergraduate at Georgetown University, and it was more fun just hanging out at John's show.
Okay, cool. Jim, does everything that David just said check out for you? Is that how you remember meeting?
Yeah. Yes, I knew John because before John lived in Chicago, I believe, and David can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he was based in Boston. Mm-hmm. But he was part of a kind of network of people in the States who were bringing people like people on basically European free improvisers, more in like the FNP vein, like Brotzman and
Paul Lovens.
Paul Lovens, but the guitarist, Hans Reichel.
Hans Reichel.
And there was a different promoter in Chicago. It was a thing called South End Music Works. But John was part of the network of people who were bringing these people over, and he would come to Chicago when these events would happen. And I remember distinctly one of the first times I met him was when it was Peter Brotzman with Davy Williams and LaDonna Smith. And Davy Williams had it was like basically a Xerox fanzine called The Improviser, which was sort of like an underground magazine of American-born improvised music. And it was sort of a cross between like, kind of that slightly southern tinged improv, which sort of mixes with Dada, basically. You like the Shaking Ray Levi's and Fred Tate and all that stuff, and punk zines. So like when I was in high school, I was like already in communication with him because it was like a zine, you could write and trade. You traded cassettes with improvisers just so you did like with noise people or whatever. And so that's how I first met John. Just filling that part in.
Okay, so that's how you met John.
John Corbett. John Corbett. Yeah,
right.
I didn't know him from his radio show, etc.
Okay. In terms of knowing and meeting David, though, how did that? I think David just explained it, but that's how you met David as well, through John. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like one day David was on the scene. Yeah. It was at the show, because even these, the improv shows is like, like 10, 12 people, and if there's a new person, you notice it,
Yeah. So what was it about the early incarnation of Gastr del Sol? Actually, I'll step back a moment. Did you see the band that preceded Gastr del Sol, Bastro? Did you ever see that band?
I did see Bastro once.
Yeah.
It's really vague because it was like a lot of shows. It was a lot of bands on a bill.
Yeah.
And I think last time David might have remembered where it could have been. I thought maybe it was Lounge Acts, but you thought not.
No. We played. I think the last show that Bastro played in Chicago was in September of '91 at Lounge Acts. Right.
Oh,
right
okay.
Before we went on tour with Codeine.
Okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
Because I went to DePaul University, which was literally a 1-minute walk from Lounge Acts.
Right.
So.
Is it worth, David, just mentioning, for anyone who's unfamiliar in particular, how Bastro sort of became Gastr del Sol? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, the final lineup for Bastro was the same as the first lineup for Gastr del Sol. So it was me, John McEntire, and Bundy Brown. And at the end of that tour in the fall of 1991, I was going to start a PhD program. I'd just done a master's in English. And John and Bundy were getting more involved with this band called Tortoise. No.
Familiar with that?
Yeah. Tortoise was becoming more of a, like an ongoing time commitment. to them. And yeah, so it kind of became clear that Bastro wasn't going to be touring regularly. Previously we would, go to Europe and pile in a van and tour for 6 weeks and things like that, which was, it was fine with me. I felt like it was time to kind of like switch things up a little. That Bastro is this kind of post-punk power trio, did one thing and, did it pretty well. But I just remember a couple of times playing in, terrible, terrible sounding venues and just feeling like, oh, we're totally hostage to what, to what it is that we do. Like this is on us. And Bundy was roommate in Chicago, and we just, we started writing music together that was much quieter, right? Either just with 2 unplugged electric guitars or with acoustic guitar, which I'd never really played before. Yeah. So it was kind of like, respect your neighbor's music.
Okay, so then the configuration of the three of you, David. So again, John McEntire, Bundy K. Brown. Oh, sorry. Then Jim enters that picture, and John and Bundy leave. Is that a way of putting it, to concentrate on Tortoise?
Yeah. I mean, so the first Gastr del Sol recording that Jim was involved in was 20 Songs Less,
right?
Which is an EP that was on Teen Beat, and it's also on this new box set. And Jim and I were talking about this in another interview. We've done a fair number of conversations lately. Oh, I think it was in speaking with Grayson Curran for the New York Times article, because he also spoke with Bundy. Yeah. So there was a lot of this, like, I called your friend and, asked him what happened. And, I mean, what Bundy said, which totally makes sense to me, was that, I mean, obviously there was the gravitational pull of Tortoise, but that, once Jim and I started working together, like it was this kind of like, I don't know, this very instantly simpatico collaboration, and I think Bundy kind of felt like, all right, y'all work on whatever it is that you're going to work on, and give me a call if you need me to play bass.
Oh, okay, so that's noble. That's noble of Bundy on some level.
Yeah.
I
mean,
well, Bundy
is nothing if not noble.
The thing that should be said about the 20 Songs Less is that was material that David, John, and Bundy recorded, and David asked me to make something out of it, treating it as raw material, and to make a tape piece out of it. So I actually don't know if I even play on that, maybe a little bit, but
I'm not sure that you do.
Yeah, but my job was more like, basically David had been asked to make a Gastr 7-inch for Teen Beat, and he's like, can you, kind of approached me as like, can you make a 7-inch out of this material, but just treating it as like raw material? If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah. No. We cut to the chase. We skipped the step of making the record, and we just went to the like the remix artist.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I think
Just go ahead and fucking remix it.
I want to home in on that, Jim. How would you characterize your sort of role in the community? Like, why would a band come to you to be like, "Hey, can you fix this for us? It's not. Something's wrong."
Well, I mean, I was already well into. I mean, basically, I made tape music. Yeah. I wasn't in a rock band.
Yeah.
I wasn't even in a band. I guess I was the guy that people know, oh, he improvises, but he makes tape music.
Right.
I mean, and I was just starting then to be a recording engineer. Not even a recording engineer. I was more just like live sound at that point. But
you were also the youngster who was already making records under his own name. Which was kind of like strange and impressive, strange. Like you weren't calling yourself like Smog or Palace or anything.
Yeah, I did have like a bunch of records out by then, but they were all like tape music.
Yeah.
And then the record with Henry Kaiser was out then as well. So, and this is a weird thing to say, and I've mentioned it before in other things, and I think David will understand what I mean. Before I played with David, I wasn't playing with anyone, or I wasn't working with or playing with anyone my age. Everyone was at least 10 years older than me.
Right.
Because there really wasn't, and I think David will back me up on this, there wasn't really anyone our age who was involved in improvised music at that time. It was really just a handful of people. It seemed like after the generation of like Zorn and Kaiser and Chadbourne and Dave Williams, it seemed like there just wasn't a new generation of players at that time.
Yeah.
So David is someone who would move to Chicago, and you go to these improvised shows. Like, I'm the only kid playing on these shows.
Yeah.
So I sort of stuck out because of that.
Do you have a sense of why that would have been the case? I mean, for those of us who know Chicago's history with improvised music, and
it doesn't have to do with Chicago. It has to do with America. It has to do with the fact that basically the arts took a crippling blow around the late 80s because all funding for the arts died.
Right.
New Music America stopped. The network of radio that supported that music stopped, like right around the end of the 80s. And going into the 90s, it was really kind of a cultural wasteland in America for any music under a certain level of, I don't know what the right word would be, appeal.
Yeah, sure.
There was no press for it. Am I right in saying this, David? It was just kind of like until like 95 or 96. There's like a good 5 or 6 year block there where like it was just a cultural wasteland for anything.
I mean, but I think you're talking mainly about improvised music.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Improvised music and new music.
Yeah.
I'm only,
yeah.
But that's the world I was coming from.
Yes.
So it was just like basically I lived in Europe for all those years because there was just nothing for me to do in America.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the evolution of this collaborative enterprise. Gastr del Sol weren't around in some ways, not a really long time, but we've kind of homed in on how this started. I wonder if we can, I don't mean to be reductive about it, but if we can talk about the sort of evolution of how you began, if we can talk about how you began working together and collaborating and where that went by the end of the project, I think that might be an interesting way of discussing your roles and how you work together. David, can you talk about that, the evolution of how you and Jim would collaborate?
Yeah, I mean, at first it really was just a matter of writing material with 2 acoustic guitars, and that's the material that wound up on the album Crooked Tractor Fly, which is the first record that we made together, or first album that we made together. And yeah, I mean that was music that it was recorded fairly quickly in the studio. It was developed fairly quickly. When we played live, it tended not to be, a world apart from the recorded versions of that. Sometimes we played as a duo. Sometimes it would expand by several players. But yeah, two guitars was kind of at the core of it for a year or two.
Jim, is that your recollection as well?
Yeah. I mean, I believe at that point I still was living with my parents. Am I correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
no, everything changed when you got your own apartment and built your studio. And
yeah. So at first it was very 2 guitar oriented, but as soon as I moved into my first apartment and built, I mean, when I say build a studio,
yeah. As soon as I said built, it sounds like you were doing construction for 9 months.
But and then finally I had a room that I could work in. Then it became very much more studio oriented. Like the guitars was more material for studio tomfoolery as opposed to the idea of like, we're writing something that we will now play for people. It became more, we'll write stuff that will become something through studio tomfoolery.
Yeah. And yeah, I would say Upgrade and Afterlife was the first album that we really were able to take our time. Because otherwise, I mean, we moved pretty quickly. We didn't have like a favorite studio that we went to time and again. We had people that we liked to record with, but it frequently was just a question of like, I don't know, do we need a piano for this? Do we need a live room of multiple people playing together? Or are we just going to John McEntire's loft and recording him playing this one part, etc.? Yeah, no, it really changed and changed for the better musically when Steam Room came into existence.
So, David, when it became something more of a studio-oriented enterprise, did that make it difficult to translate that material live in any particular way?
No, it just made it a challenge. Yeah. No, I don't ever recall like approaching live, the invitation to play live with this kind of like fear and trembling of like, oh my God, how will we, translate our studio creation to a live performance? I mean, sometimes, I felt like we did a tour with John McEntire with 2 electric guitars, drum kit, and 2 Farfisa organs. And yeah, that was really good. And that wasn't necessarily captured on the albums, but that was a pretty kick-ass version of the group.
Yeah. Jim, if we look back on that time, do you have any perspective on how you each evolved, not only as players, in your own practice, but how you evolved as collaborators? How would you characterize that for Gastr del Sol, or can you characterize that?
Well, if anything, as a player, I devolved. Not because of Gastr, but I was already on the path of having no interest in playing the guitar and just being more happy in front of the mixing desk. But that's neither here nor there. David was definitely finding his own, like through the course of the years of Gastr del Sol, which sort of in a way ends with him writing the material for David, excuse me, is it orange cabbage?
Oh, banana cabbage.
Banana cabbage.
Lettuce,
I'm sorry.
Onion orange. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Writing the material that became that, which was, if I'm remembering correctly, was simultaneously with us making Camoufleur. He really distilled, especially his particular sense of space and waiting and letting notes both on the attack and their decay. This sounds weird and technical, but I think David will understand. I think it'll make sense in the end.
Yeah.
Through Gastr, he was changing, his guitar playing was changing from all of his influences, of course, from his own playing from Squirrel Bait through Bastro, but also through other influences that he had been taking in. And by the time we made Camoufleur, I think he had found his own 100%, his own way of playing that was partially forged, I guess is a way, through the various challenges isn't the right word, the various situations that doing Gastr stuff put his playing through, so that by the end of Gastr, it was 100% fully formed. David's guitar playing was there. Does that, you know what I'm saying, David?
Yeah. No, that's very gratifying. Thank you for saying that.
Because when you made that record, it was 100% you.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was a new thing. It was a new you.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're saying that it was a new him, but it was his actual voice, like wholly his voice at this point?
Yes, I would say that. Yeah.
And David, it sounds like you say it's gratifying. Does that resonate with you? Did you feel that?
Yeah. But I feel like the condition of the possibility of that was through playing with Jim, and in particular through Jim playing organ or electronics or, tape elements while I was playing guitar. I feel like that's how I became a much more, spacious, open, patient player through some of the kinds of duo performances that you hear from the Victoriaville concert.
Right. Okay. In terms of your own evolution as a singer and as a lyricist, David, can you walk us through where you think you went in Gastr? Because
I'm not sure that I believe in an evolution with those. I feel like they kind of were almost ad hoc, project by project approaches.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the most successful in terms of lyric writing and singing in Gastr del Sol was Camoufleur, because those songs flow in a way that I had done everything I could to like stem the flow and work in a much more fragmentary manner on other Gastr del Sol records. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the things. No, that sounds terrible. But I'm about to say, like, one of the reasons why Camaflora works as well as it does. But I feel like yes, I did find a way to writing and handling lyrics as a singer with Camaflora that felt much more satisfying to me than the earlier records, even as like all of the kind of like strangeness and awkwardness of those earlier records was, quite deliberate.
Jim, what's your perspective on David's lyric writing and his singing as someone who I assume had to kind of help put it together, so to speak? Do you have?
Oh, I was always hands off with the lyrics. I don't know if I ever even said any.
Oh, I don't even mean input.
But
okay.
I mean because it's like it's an embarrassing story, and I've said it in another thing, so I won't repeat it. But like I very early on realized, hands off. This is not something I know about, and I knew enough to know that I didn't know. But one thing, what David was saying there, I completely can agree with him. And from my perspective, the reason I agree with him is that Camaflora was, all the earlier records had sort of anchor points, and not references so much, but the shadows of very large and looming influences are very much there on all the records until Camaflora. And I think of them as anchor points because they're very specific, sort of like rhythmic and, if the word is correct, iambic sort of structures in the song that I would think would tell David to write and shape his lyrics in a certain way, because the musical line and the vocal line are so intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
But with Camaflora, it was more like, I'm just thinking about, I'm guessing his perspective. But with Camaflora, I would think David would have to look at lyric writing more as a collage aspect, because it's sort of the rhythmic and spatial elements of the music that was written for Camaflora don't bend to the lyrics,
right?
Where the music before had, because they were sort of together in a way. They were created together in a certain way. I mean, David wasn't writing the lyrics in front of me, but the writing process lent itself to that more so than it did on Camaflora, where I think David was approached with a challenge of like, I've got this landscape that is already there that I have to now find a way to find how these lyrics, what their rhythmic concept is. I mean, I would think for David, it was the first time you had to think of the rhythmic concept outside of tethering it to the musical line.
Yeah, because otherwise, like on the earlier records, the lyrics and the vocal melodies follow the instrumental parts so closely, and it was one of the things that I liked about the kind of like the contortions and strange dislocations of like trying to map language onto these existing pieces of music.
Did you see your role as a lyricist as something of a playful one per se, David?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. Humor was big.
Yes.
Okay. Where does that come from? We were talking earlier about Robert Smigel, and Jim and I were geeking out about comedy there for a few moments, Conan and whatnot. What about you? Where does your comedic sensibility come from?
Oh my God, my comedic sensibility. I don't know, to amuse myself. I don't know. My comedic sensibility is maybe a little more ingrown.
You didn't follow comedy. You didn't have comedic, I guess, inspirations.
Not really.
Life is funny to you? Is that what you're saying?
Life is quite funny. Yeah. Life is more than funny enough.
Okay. And Jim, I appreciate what you're saying about not wanting to, or not feeling comfortable to critique or reconstruct any of the lyrics. But when you hear them as someone who's involved in the production of the record, do any of them, or maybe we can start with this collection, do any of them give you any, like, do they perk your ear? Do they make you think, what the hell is going on over here?
Well, I mean, I'm sort of straight, like I sort of, there's there's like two modes of lyrics for me. I mean, for me, and I don't know how David will take this, but I think he'll understand. For me, there's lyrics that evoke images, and for me that comes from when I was young and reading Burroughs. And David's obviously a huge reader. I'm not a big word guy. I'm not a big I read manuals, for gear, and science books and film books. But like fiction and like prose, I'm not a big reader. But Burroughs was a big deal for me when I was in high school because I had never seen anything that just created images in my head.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that mode. I appreciate lyrics that do that. And then there's I don't know what the right word for it is. I guess meta. I know that's a terrible word, but 74 Sparks, David Ackley's, blah, blah, blah. So those two I can feel a resonance with. Everything else is I just don't even know I don't know why people bother. I'm just weird like that. David's lyrics fell into the previous, what I'm talking about. It created images to me. And so that's how I connected with it. I'm not knowledgeable about literature or poetry. So I wasn't as informed. I wasn't informed enough then, and I'm not now, to understand them on that level, to know the depth and resonance that's obviously happening. But to me, they created images, which was appropriate for the music.
Yeah. I don't think that you need, I mean, my feeling was always that you didn't need any kind of academic study to, take what you will from the lyrics. But what you're saying, Jim, about the lyrics, certainly prior to Camoufleur, as being like a succession of often disconnected images, that like it was, verbs were often lacking, and the kind of connective tissue between different parts, were occluded, like they were more like jump cuts. Yeah, so your description makes perfect sense to me.
The title for this collection, we have dozens of titles, I believe is a paraphrase of something from Blues subtitled No Sense of Wonder. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. And I'm sorry, the title just made me laugh, and then I remembered that song, and that's where I'm coming from. I think for some people, Gastr is this like serious, artistic statement, and that's there. It's heavy on some level, but I wonder, Jim, in terms of the music, like I've already asked David about his own approach and whether or not it has a playfulness to it. Do you view the band as you ponder it now, with this collection and whatnot? Do you view it as particularly playful in the grand scheme of things?
Okay. Let me see if I can. Sorry, my English. Despite what image there is of me and what people think of me, people who've actually worked with me, and David will vouch for this, I'm making fun of everything constantly.
Yeah. Jim's a fucking comedian.
I think those of us who follow your work, Jim, know that.
Well, but they definitely didn't then.
Yeah.
But, like Robert Downey Sr. and Albert Brooks are two of my biggest heroes.
Right.
And David probably had to listen to me go on about them constantly.
Albert Brooks, yeah. You've saved the movie. Yeah.
Albert Brooks is a genius. I kind of approach music the way Albert Brooks approaches what he does,
right, Right. Okay.
So with me, it isn't playful. I think this is a little bit difference between David and I. David is playful and he enjoys being playful. I don't know what the right word is for me. It's arch isn't the right word, is it?
Oh, maybe that's moving
closer
in the right direction.
Yeah.
But arch has has a negative connotation, right?
It does. That's a kind of like an elevated, kind of like ironic, parodic version.
But I think Albert Brooks has that too.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
He does. Yeah. But my Albert Brooks was cut with Robert Downey Sr.,
right,
which is as silly as you can get.
Right.
I don't know what the right way to describe, but I'm always kind of looking through the microscope as opposed to like hanging out in a petri dish.
Okay.
I've always sort of been like that.
Yeah.
But in the actual act of making things, I'm usually laughing most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if that's an answer.
I was going to say around the same time, Jim and I were both playing in the Red Crayola, and people, can think of the Red Crayola, certainly on particular records, as kind of like being this like in your face, forbidding, like intellect, deal with it.
Yeah.
But Mayo Thompson is really one of the funniest people you could ever hope to meet. I mean, yeah, just like so much busting a gut, like making Red Crayola music.
And George Hurley, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the funniest people ever.
George is very, oh God, I can't repeat the funny George stories.
Yeah.
But like very funny. Like the Minutemen were funny. I mean, Hurley came up with most of the spiel and the vernacular, the Pedro stuff. Like,
yeah.
And he's from Massachusetts or something, I think. Like he's just very funny. So yeah, I know there's humor here. I brought it up because I've been playing, we have dozens of titles in the house, and I don't know if my wife likes it. And she's like, this is very serious music all the time that you're playing all the time. I was making pancake breakfast for everyone today and dinner too, and I had it playing, and my son just froze. He was like, what is this? I feel like I'm in a horror movie. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what song it was, but I find that funny. Like, I find it funny that they find it unsettling. Yeah. And I think there's something to that, maybe, in this work. That's all. I wanted to just express that I think it's amusing, and I appreciate your...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of amazing that a note can be funny.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of amazing.
Yes.
Like, that note is very, very... I mean, I don't mean like in the Zappa sense of funny, but there's definitely moments that are very, very funny. And, maybe it's insider baseball funny. I don't know.
No, I think it's there. Like I say, I mean, I'm not part of your crew or anything like that, but I think people listen and hear it, and they hear that. I mean, like I say, I pick up on it. I mean, I'm a comedy person maybe, and I look for comedy in places where there isn't sometimes, or maybe it's not as obvious. Maybe you two are similar on some level. Like the milieu you're in isn't known for maybe being funny.
Well, at the time that which we existed, everyone was so earnest.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to an improvised music festival and someone is making this high art using a rubber chicken, I used to look around and I'm like, how are people not finding this funny? Like this is.
No, I don't know. There's lots of funny improvised music.
That's true too.
That's kind of a touchy subject.
Okay.
Funny improvising is, like, to me, that's not
deeply
funny
unfunny.
No, I just
deeply unfunny.
I appreciate that, but I think some of the stuff you hear, or some of the stuff you see people do with their viscerally, like with their bodies, it's funny. It's funny that the noises people make. It's funny. I don't know how else to put it. And yet everyone's just like, scratching their chins and whatever. And I just think there's humor in improvisation.
I think that the audience for that might be different from place to place, because I've seen people laughing uproariously at some of the most unfunny improvising I've ever seen. Large audiences enjoying the let's look at the world a different way improvising.
I interrupt this episode of my own show for a brief thank you for hearing my call to support me and my work on Patreon. We have seen a lot of growth in Patreon support over the last little while, which is amazing because that's my primary source of income these days. And I love doing this job that I invented for myself a whole lot. Creative Control is a listener-supported podcast. Do podcasters receive any streaming royalties from podcast platforms? No, not any. Does podcast advertising pay the bills? Not for a show at this scale, no. Do all podcasters get paid by companies for their work like some celebrities do? No, most of us do not. We do this work to support our communities and because we love it. So what's the most reliable source of income for podcasters like me? Crowdfunding platforms like Patreon. So if you love Creative Control with Vish Khanna and want to see it continue, please see the notes in this episode. Click on the link that takes you to my Patreon and its different donation tiers with various incentives and benefits, and support me and my work today. Thank you again so much. Earlier, I invoked Chicago, and Jim, you talked about the fact that that period of time that we were referring to, when you said, I think you were intimating that improvised music was kind of decimated by the lack of
No. I don't mean
infrastructure.
that I'm not saying the music. It still existed. Just the support structure sort of disappeared.
Yeah, I was starting to clarify that. The sort of infrastructural aspect of it wasn't present, so that's why. But when you listen back to the band's work, do you hear anything that feels tied to a specific mindset or approach in Chicago music making of the time? Like, are you brought back to something by hearing this music?
I think just the first record has that element, personally. I mean, I shouldn't say the first because it's actually the second, the Crook Cracked. I think you can hear what was going on in Chicago then, because a lot of those people are on the record, but I think, I think you can hear that David and I are going to Hot House and going to, I forget what the name of that bookstore. You can hear what was going on. MooreEp, yeah. You can kind of hear what was going on in Chicago on that record, I would say.
Right. David, go ahead.
The next. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask David to elaborate upon the Chicago you're describing, Jim, before I ask you to follow up. David, do you know what Jim means?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. A lot of the players that appear on Crook, Cracked or Fly, we would regularly play with them in improvised settings at places like the Hot House or MooreEp Books, and when we invited them into the studio, it was a little bit like, okay, Gene Coleman, like make the Gene Coleman bass clarinet sound, or Steve Butters, the percussionist. It sort of sounds like how Steve played in lots of different contexts. So yeah, no, I see definitely how that record is a little bit more like tapping certain players and just like, come on into the studio with us.
Yeah. So as you listen back to the music you made, these documents of the work you did together, Jim, are you at all sentimental for that time in Chicago?
No, I'm just generally not a sentimental person, so it isn't just that. I was happy to hear that it was way more developed and had actually become the thing more than I remembered. I'm kind of big on the idea of actually being the thing instead of being the state of moving towards a thing. And it sounds silly, but let's say, for example, Morton Feldman's music it's become what it is.
Right.
As opposed to moving towards it, being gestures moving towards something or referring to something as opposed to being it. And those are kind of two different states in music. You could kind of split all music into those two states. And the Gastr stuff, listening back to when I was putting the new masters together, I was pleasantly surprised is not a phrase I usually use because it has a sort of sentimental. But I really was. I was like, oh, this was way farther along than I thought it was.
Huh. Yeah.
There were certain tracks that truly were already in the state of being as opposed to referring to being.
Yeah.
Especially like Bells of St. Mary's. I was really taken aback at how absolutely it is in the state of being itself. And that made me very happy is another word I don't like.
Pleased. You were pleased.
Yeah. Okay.
Gratified?
Yeah, I've got problems with lots of words.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's not the right word.
That'll be my box set. I've got problems with lots of words.
I have dozens of problems with lots of words.
Maybe begin with the double negative. You weren't horrified.
I had the curious experience of feeling nostalgic for the people that your band influenced. I was nostalgic listening to this.
Oh, tell us who you're talking about.
Well, I was brought back to...
Because Drag City, like in talking about releasing this and, promo strategies and things like this, in this first meeting, they kept asking, like, well, who are the people who were influenced by you?
Yeah.
And Jim and I, it's not even only being like, whatever, like bashful or modest or something like that, but just genuinely kind of feeling like, I don't know, like... Yeah, not for me to say, and I'm not just being coy. Like I don't walk around feeling like, oh, all of those people who wouldn't exist without.
I didn't grow up there. I moved to a college town in Ontario, Canada, called Guelph, Ontario, and when I got there in '96, there had already been a bit of a home rock explosion of people making music on their own. And there's a fellow, he's a friend of mine, and I still actually use some music of his on the show. His name's Jim Guthrie. And Jim was a fan of Jim's in particular. And now that I'm been so more and more immersed in Gastr of late, your music has brought me back to his early tapes and his music and his collage explorations. And I haven't texted him to ask him because it's been a long time since we would have talked about your band and your work. But that's just a sensation I had of like, this reminds me of, and Jim was a figurehead in Guelph and influenced a bunch of younger artists. So the domino effect of Gastr influencing Jim meant a bunch of people tried to make music like you did. And so I'm just saying, this was my personal subjective experience with this music of late. I'm sure there are people like me all around the world who have similar experiences of, oh, that's where my buddy got that from. You know what I mean? Does that resonate?
It seems entirely possible.
Yeah.
But I've never strongly felt nor been, kind of obsessed with like tracking down, like I'm going to prove to you that this is influenced by, I don't know.
Yeah.
It just really, my brain doesn't work like that.
I mean, it's funny because on the opposite way of looking at it, I'm not someone who followed the world of music that we were in, that we were connected to, both because of the label we were on and what was happening culturally at the time. I wasn't the big follower of other people. I didn't know much of it.
Yeah.
And especially since then. But that said, and I might be wrong because I didn't really follow, I've never heard anybody that sounded like us since then.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard stuff where there's sprinklings on top of very traditional song structures. I've heard a lot of that.
Yeah.
But to me, that's not the same thing until it's on the fundamental level of the songwriting. Those considerations, if they're not there at the root of it, it's not similar to me.
It's a good point you raised, because even the person I describe, I think, would take elements of Gastr and then turn them into more pop-oriented frameworks. So I can hear it, but I also know Jim in particular would write verse, chorus, verse, bridge songs more so than maybe some of your material is. Does that make anyway? I think
I don't mean that as a not degrading,
disparaging. Disparaging.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I don't mean it that way. I just mean it's not the same thing.
Yeah,
it's not. That's why when we were at, I've never really heard anything that sounds like Gastr since Gastr.
This is a nice segue into a question I wanted to ask you both, actually. Given your trajectories as creative people, I'd wondered how your work in Gastr distinguishes itself from other projects you've been in, other people you've worked with. David, since we're in this reflective mode, I'm sure you've thought about this a little bit, maybe? I don't know. Can you think of how it distinguishes itself for you?
I mean, the collaboration with Jim was something that unfolded over 4 or 5 years on a kind of like intense schedule, sometimes working like 4 or 5 days a week. And the collaborations that I've done since then have tended to be kind of like quicker hit and run. It's somebody who lives, in Berlin, but I live in New York, and I get to see them 2 weeks out of the year. And some of it is done long distance. And yeah, I feel like I haven't worked that intensely living in the same city with another person. And so I think things, Jim and I felt that particularly with the records that we recorded in Jim's apartment, that we could really take our time with them. Whereas the other collaborations that I've done, you know that you have a brief period of time together with somebody else, or you're doing it remotely, and that really influences the character of it. And also, Jim is like nobody else. So, so like working with other people is not like working with Jim, because they don't bring the same approach, or the same skill set. But yeah, I think the main thing is, after Gastr del Sol broke up, I moved to New York a year after that, and suddenly, I don't know, New York was not has never been as conducive to feeling like you have all the time in the world. And I moved to New York. I was so accustomed to, like, in Chicago. So the first solo record that I made after Gastr del Sol was called The Thicket. And I remember when recording that, like having an idea like, oh, maybe I need a electric bass on these 2 tracks, and maybe it should be somebody who plays very differently than I do. Oh, I'll call Josh Abrams. Oh, he's available tomorrow, and it would just happen like that, And in New York, I moved to New York, and it's like, oh, like I should really play with Tim Barnes. Like, what a great drummer. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm on tour for the next 2 months. Yeah. That nobody was in New York because people were like trying to cover their rent, like working 3 jobs or touring so much. Yeah. Yeah. Chicago. Or they just didn't have time to really like let it marinate.
I think Chicago is a very special place. It is one of these, from what I can tell anyway, from my perspective, it's one of these places that it's a big city, but the musical community is actually quite small and tight-knit. That's my reading of it. I'm sure there's people have had different experiences. And I think
it definitely was then. I can't say about now, but it definitely was then.
I think a number of people have
overlapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed more like an archipelago of music community, rather than like one island. It was like a string of islands.
David, you were also, I think, describing a bit of a time of life situation. You were younger when you worked with Jim, and I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but I'm sure you have vocational commitments now, and over the last 20 years that you didn't then. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, so I mean, at the time when Jim and I were spending most of the time in Gastr del Sol, I was working on a PhD in English. I'd finished my coursework and my exams. I had a dissertation fellowship, wow. and I had a kind of like nice, relatively easy part-time lecture position at the Art Institute of Chicago. So yeah, it wasn't, and I finished my PhD 15 years after I started it. So, I was in academic cryogenic suspension. So I had a lot of time. Yeah, but I'm a college professor now, so I also have a lot of time.
David, you seem very smart. You seem like a smart man.
I don't know what to say. It's an illusion.
Jim, similar kind of question there. Does when you ponder your time in Gastr, does it distinguish itself from other projects you've had or other work you've done?
Well, it's the only one that was that. I mean, it was, and also the fact that it was just the 2 of us. Everything after that, I also from learning human, like life experience, because and I don't think David will disagree with me. I probably was manic depressive the whole time we were working together, because I would work like a maniac for 14, 16 days, hours a day, and then I'd be in a black hole. I was just alternating between the 2, and afterwards I learned because obviously I played with those guys on the wall afterwards, but I understood my role was just to be my role, and I can't make decisions. It's a group decision. Yeah. But that's more of a group. There was it was 5 people. So I had to take that perspective on it. And, also I was playing with Christian and Peter, in Fenneberg, which was really easy because it's basically just walk on stage. It's basically improvised music. It just doesn't sound like it. But it's just sort of, they were situations where it wasn't this intense sort of like, there's two people making this thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was really a different situation. And I've never really been in that situation since. I mean, the only thing even close? I mean, no, it's not even close. I was thinking about Aiko and I. Basically, the only band-like thing I do now is with Aiko and I do duos shows. But that's more like Fenneberg. We just walk on stage and do it.
Yeah.
We're not thinking about making a thing. I think that was the distinction with Gastr, is that the two of us were making this thing. And I don't think that situation has existed in my life since.
Yeah.
I mean, it exists when I'm by myself.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But not with not with other people. So it was distinct that way.
Yeah.
I hope that made sense.
It does.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. David, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I think I was going to say something, and I realized that I'd basically said it already.
Okay.
You know, that I'd never had that kind of, 4 or 5 day a week over the course of years collaborative relationship with anybody else. I love working collaboratively.
Yeah.
I also like playing solo. I'm happy to spend time working by myself. I'm happy to spend time, by myself. But working collaboratively right now is a kind of like series of quick, I don't know, I was going to say pressure cooker. That's an overstatement. They're like intense short working periods, and then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have not had a working methodology like Gastr del Sol since Gastr del Sol.
It seems very special to me, and by your accounts, it is. And you've done a lot of press recently. I think one of you alluded to the New York Times piece. I think it was David. So I've read accounts about the band's dissolution. So I'm not flying blind here when I ask this, but for those listening who might be unfamiliar, I think we should cover the end of the band. Jim, how would you characterize the end of Gastr? How did it end and why?
Well, I think things outside of Gastr had crept into both of our lives at that point. And as David is saying, Gastr needed a lot of time and a lot of our attention. And there were other things vying for that attention at that point.
Yeah.
And it was kind of both of these can't coexist in a way. I mean, it was it's like literally almost time-wise, Mm-hmm. I was, at the beginning of Gastr, I was still basically living like a bum. I was like, a guy who played improvised music in Europe and stuff, and then like scrounged off his friends living on their couches and blah, blah, blah. And then during the course of Gastr, I had started to be able to actually pay the bills by being an engineer. And through that, of people starting to say, well, can you produce as well?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I was like kind of working. I actually was kind of, for the first time in my life, like having work, as opposed to living like a scratchy bum, basically. Well, you remember I wore all my clothes were like military. I wore like, you see me in the pictures. I wore like what's the place I'm thinking of?
It's like, whatever the army
surplus.
Surplus.
Yeah, army
there
surplus.
Yeah,
because it was I had to live like super cheap.
Yeah.
And through that time, I started realizing you can't, and this is going to sound weird, but in Europe, when it started to happen for me personally, and I think it had already started to happen before Gastr, but it was definitely starting to happen, was I'd be playing with these people who are older than me, and we'd be, we'd be in France somewhere. And afterwards they'd be complaining about the money that they got. And I was thinking, when I do this in Chicago, I'm lucky if I get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not complaining that they complained, but slowly I started thinking, I cannot rely isn't the right word. This cannot have anything to do with me paying the bills. This can't be part of how I live. It has to be something I just care about.
Yes.
And that's why I started working. I started studying hard to become a recording engineer, and eventually, and by the time Gastr was over, any moment that wasn't on Gastr, I was like recording other bands.
Right.
And it was appealing because my childhood dream from like Pete Townsend interviews and Zappa interviews and stuff was to be like a producer.
Yeah.
I really wanted to be a record producer.
Yeah.
And I got to be for a couple of years. And I think both of our lives were getting crowded by the other possibilities that were meant to be in our lives. If that's the right way to put it.
Yeah.
And it was just time to put our attentions to the next step of our lives.
Yeah. David, I want to ask, so yeah, it sounds like material conditions and some stress played a role. David, did you want to add to that? And then within that, I'm wondering if you can talk about how the end of Gastr impacted this relationship you had with Jim. Is it possible to talk about that?
I mean, it put the relationship on pause for a long period of time. I mean, after we finished Camoufleur and the Stephen Prina record that we co-produced, you know, Jim was the person who said, you know, I don't want to continue with this. And it was tough to hear, but not a complete surprise. And I certainly understood his reasons for it. But yeah, I feel like it was a few years before, you know, we really had a conversation, and then like, you know, many years before we had a long, meaningful conversation. And yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I've been happiest about the box set is working with Jim on this, and you know, and having conversations like this one. Yeah, because for years we didn't.
But it's very simple, you know, in a way. From both of our perspectives, this was a situation, a thing that we had no experience with, that had not happened to us in our life.
Yeah.
So our reactions and our internal reactions, internal feelings we were completely in a situation we didn't know how to deal with. And we were both young.
Yes.
So you were in your mid-20s roughly?
Oh God. Yeah. I'm at that point, I was like, what, 29?
Oh, okay.
And
I was 30.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, coming into adulthood, more for real. Yeah.
I mean, from 25 or 26 years later, 29 and 30 sounds pretty young. But I was just thinking, like, as you were saying it there, it's like 30. I don't know. That sounds pretty fucking old to me.
It sounds like you would have been mature enough age-wise, but it also, like, the way Jim's describing his lifestyle, it was still a little scattered. It was almost the life of a 20-year-old, a college student or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't like irresponsible or anything. I had dedicated myself to I kind of didn't do anything else with my life except watch movies and work, and that creates a certain kind of person.
Yes, absolutely.
Although, Vish, I have to say, though, that from my perspective, the way Jim was living his life then was, I mean, he was making it up as he was going along. Like, I feel like I was making it up as I was going along, not, you know, like being able to get by without like a regular full-time job.
Yeah.
But it was also very different from just like your average 20-year-old without any responsibilities. I mean, Jim was just like working like a madman, you know, like working intensely, but working with like having the opportunity to work with like a long string of very brilliant, extraordinary people. You know, like, why wouldn't you want to work with, you know, like John Fahey and, you know, Bill Callahan and, you know, just like endless list of folks. So, yeah, I mean, Jim was dealing with a lot of demands, you know, and had opportunities. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, like, he was operating in a sphere that I think the 20-year-olds typically don't.
Yeah, fair enough. It sounds like the schedule was tight. the band had run its course, but in the ensuing years, I
don't think necessarily it ran its course. I'm sure we would have, I'm sure we still had great records in us. Absolutely. I don't think it run its course at all.
Maybe that's the wrong phrase.
I think the way of life that made it possible to do it had run its course, maybe.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it, and I apologize. I didn't mean to suggest it was...
No, I didn't mean that you had said anything bad. It's just...
No, you did. You did say that. You said I said something bad. You said I said the worst thing possible, and I'm defending myself now.
Deliberately, yeah. It was all... This conversation was all leading to that moment where he's just like, I'll get their trust, and then I'll plunge two daggers.
And I am recording this, so I'll be able to check.
Yeah.
I wonder if... Again, schedule is busy. What's a better way of putting it? You went your own ways. Let's put it that way. You hadn't run its course, but you stopped being in the band. Was there ever a moment, Jim, I'll start with you, where you longed for it? You missed it enough that you were like, fuck, I kind of wish we were still doing that. Like, I also wonder sometimes if something happens in the zeitgeist, if you will, in the cultural moment, we're like, man, we should still be a band, damn it. Like, we'd be doing well if we were working right now. Did you have anything like that, Jim?
Okay. Well, in my case, what happened is I kind of went into a black hole after that for a couple of years. And there was a good period of time, not right after Gastr, but like I did right after Gastr, really, I like was doing almost nothing but being other people's engineer, other people's this. And then a black hole where basically I just whatever. I did nothing of my own for a long time. So in that state, I don't think I was thinking back, I wish I was I was kind of just working so much that I don't even know who I was then, But the thing on the opposite side of that, the thing that bugged me, and this is going to sound, I didn't think we ever got the due that we deserved.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was also my disappointment at music in general. I know that sounds strange.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, we were earlier talking about how you couldn't really identify people who might have been overtly influenced by Gastr. But sometimes when you have that, we didn't get our due, it can be steeped in a kind of resentment for someone who is getting their due for something you did that was similar, but it was nothing like that. It
wasn't that. Yeah. It was more my disappointment at music.
Yeah.
I didn't think music, and the disappointment I had in people making music. I mean, it took a long time. I mean, it's because I had invested part of myself into like, here's a world of new musicians and new people. And this is very, very exciting. And in the end, the bulk of them were not interesting to me.
Yeah.
And this sounds horrible. I don't mean it to sound horrible, but it was sort of like, you read a book if you say you see a film by somebody, this is an interesting director, and you really dive into their work, and it's like, it was only that movie.
Yeah. It seemed so interesting.
Yeah. And then you look back at that movie and you're like,
yeah.
It's more from that perspective that, I thought this was going to be a great thing, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. I think I pick up on what you're saying there. David, similar question though. You were quite preoccupied with lots of different things by the sounds of it, but in the time that you weren't working with Jim, did you ever long to reconnect or work together?
I mean, for a number of years, I wished that we had a better, line, that we had a line of communication that was open.
Yeah.
That would have been the more meaningful thing. But I don't think that Gastr del Sol would have been a satisfying thing for us if it became like other collaborations that I was engaged in, where like, 2 weeks out of the year we work on this, I think that a lot of the success of it was really predicated on the time that we put into it.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why with the box set, I mean, people invariably say, like, you know, is there going to be a, you know, new record of new material and a tour and things like that? And it's really hard to imagine that, you know, because I mean, it all seems to have been predicated on the working schedule and, you know, like how we made music between 1993 and 1998. Right.
But do you work remotely with people nowadays, David?
I do, but when I work remotely with them, it's kind of not a give and take, you know, day in, day out. Yeah, they tend to be more of these kind of hit and run collaborations.
I thought I'd read a more definitive no, there won't be more Gastr activity after, like, this box set is. Sorry, I should take a step back. Because I don't think we really nailed down why this reconciliation actually occurred. It's the auspices was this box set. Is that right, David? Or no?
I mean, we
sat... It was years before that.
Oh, it was years before that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we'd been in email communication, you know, for at least 10 years. And then...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or more than that. And then in 2016 was the first time that we sat down and really, like, had a long conversation.
But that's completely my fault because I like moved to the other side of the planet and became a hermit. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, pretty much no one sees me, so that's completely down to me.
Okay. So the reconciliation occurred, Jim. Why exactly? I mean, that initial reopening of communication lines. Can you tell us how that occurred?
I think it was just in an email. Just said, we both said we were young and overreacted and we didn't know how to deal with the situation. I mean, I believe it was just like one email interchange between us.
Yeah. Who sent it?
Well, we think we both did.
Yeah, that's not how...
Simultaneously. Actually, so I think, I mean, occasionally we would be asked by Drag City, like, you know, are you all okay with licensing, you know, this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And Jim, I think that the first time in a number of years that we were in any kind of, like, decision-making contact was Jeff Hunt had some questions about, you know, releasing the live Atrium Festival material, which didn't happen. And I think that we were in contact about that, like that I had gone through the recording of the live set and said, you know, I think that this track is you know, the only one that merits release. You know, and actually that's Dictionary of Handwriting, which is on the box set. But I feel like you and I had a little bit more of a kind of like friendly email contact, you know, answering Jeff's question about the Atrium recordings. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like the reconnection was social, and then there's been some business here and there throughout this time. Jim, from your perspective, is what I said earlier correct? Like, this is it? There's not going to be more Gastr stuff, per se?
I mean, who knows? I mean, I'd be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I stopped music completely. So that would make it very difficult for David to work with someone.
AI, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, I sold most of my instruments a couple of years ago. You know, it's like, I mean, in order to do that, it really, what David's saying is absolutely correct. It was only that because it was work on this type of level.
Yeah.
And I don't even know. I mean, we could play together again, but in terms of like Gastr thing, the thing that was Gastr, let's say, I mean, of course there was Gastr before that, but the thing we're talking about, for that to actually be that requires a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of investment. So if that's possible, but we're both older. David has a family. I'm a hermit. So, yeah.
And you sold all your instruments, so you got to get those back. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely not happening. I really never want to touch a guitar again in my life.
Interesting. Okay.
So it makes it very difficult for other people.
Impossible to speculate on some level. David, two things. Thoughts on what Jim just said, but also, given the scale of this set, do you think you've mined the treasure in the Gastr coffers at this point? Is there other stuff that we could see?
No, I think we've definitely mined what we would want to see released. I mean, I'm always happy whenever people, point me in the direction of like, it's a video recording of the two of you with John McEntire, from Atlanta.
That video is really, really good, though.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's shockingly good.
Oh.
That Atlanta show video.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
I mean, I was amazed when I first saw it.
Yeah.
I have to watch this. I haven't seen it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think
quite okay. You'll have something to look forward to. Yeah,
it's split up. It's a whole show in Atlanta.
Oh.
Of a tour when we were touring with Tony Conrad.
Oh, nice.
But it's the version with John.
Oh, cool.
And someone filmed the whole show, and I think at first it was up on YouTube as the whole show, but now I believe if I'm correct, it's split up into the tracks.
Yeah, it's individual tracks. I've watched like 3 or 4 tracks of it. It's really good.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
but
it's really, really good.
Yeah.
Especially, is it Wrong Soundings? Is that the one where we kind of did our 24-track loop version live?
I think that was, maybe.
Yeah,
that is the Wrong Soundings. Yeah.
Sounds like all three of us need to watch this video to verify what it actually is. I think that's what's happening. No, that's really cool. Okay, so that's it for past material. David, following up on what Jim said, it was intriguing. I think what he said was intriguing. He didn't say no. He said it would take a lot of work for you to play together again or collaborate in some capacity. At least that's what I'm choosing to take from what he said. What is your interpretation of what he said?
My interpretation seems kind of very much like what you just said. I mean, I'm not one who typically says no categorically. So, but it's really kind of difficult to imagine. I don't know. I could imagine us at some point making music together. That would be marvelous. But I kind of can't imagine that it would be, or that it should be, filed under the name Gastr del Sol.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point.
It's fascinating. That's fascinating.
It was that.
If I was in marketing, I'd be like, guys, doesn't matter.
Guys.
Just keep the name, guys. You'll do big numbers.
Yeah, but you got to understand that if anything, both David and I are the kind of people that would make us say no.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. Yes, I appreciate that. Well, listen, I'm finally mindful of the time. I think I may have kept us longer than we were expected to. I hope you guys have enjoyed yourselves well enough.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
I feel like we've almost only scratched the surface of this set, but I think that's fine. I hope people will pick it up for themselves and feel intrigued to check it out, because I think it's beautiful and I want to get it physically, because I've only had this digital ghost version and I don't like it as much, but it's brilliant music and I can't wait to hold it in my hands. Yeah. What's next questions? I mean, we kind of just covered this, but I actually, in your case, it's not about Gastr. Let's talk about future plans for each of you that you're willing to share in your own pursuits if you have them. David, is there something coming up for you that you're making for public consumption, so to speak?
Yeah, there always is. I do a label called Blue Chopsticks, and a couple of days ago we released Tony Conrad's final recording.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's a Tony Conrad and Jennifer Walsh record called In the Merry Month of May. And I guess my next record is a duo record with Lauren Connors for guitar and piano, in which we switch off. So I play piano on the first side of the record, and Lauren plays piano on the second side of the record.
Cool.
Is that a live record or a studio record?
No, it's a studio record.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
I'll send it
nice.
to you.
Great.
It comes out on Room 40 in the fall.
Okay.
Oh, Lawrence.
Great.
Yeah. So is that a CD or LP?
LP.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I don't want to say anything untoward here, David, but if you want to come back to talk about that, you're more than welcome.
Sure. I would be happy to do so.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else? And within that, sorry, if people want to kind of keep track of your comings and goings, David, where would they go?
Oh, I don't know. Stalk me on social media.
You're on most of the things, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a late adopter because I felt that I would be wasting too much time doing that. And I do waste too much time doing that, but eventually I adopted.
So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook kind of stuff?
Yeah, all of that stuff.
Okay, cool.
You know, I can attribute it to or blame it on Pauline Oliveros. I was playing with her once, and we were doing a rehearsal, and there was a break, and, you know, I don't know, this was like more than, 12, 13 years ago. All the musicians immediately were kind of like complaining bitterly about, like, you know, how, you know, like online existence isn't real existence and things like that. And Pauline, who was like 79 years old or something, sort of like turned to everybody with a big grin, and she was like, Facebook, Twitter, I do it all. You know, like, why wouldn't I want to be in contact with people, you know, I love who live all over the world?
Oh, she was wonderful. I got to see her at the Guelph Jazz Festival, actually, many, many years ago. And yeah, I missed that festival, actually. Anyway, that's my own thing. I didn't mean to bring my life into yours. Jim, anything coming up? It sounds like, I'm not sure if there is. I don't know why. You sold everything. You're a hermit. Yeah. Anything coming up?
I'm mostly working on the Rolling Cane archive. That's going to take a couple years. I'm mixing Eiko Ishibashi's new record now. I don't believe I have anything happening. Give me 1 sec. I honestly don't think I do. The record I made with Eiko is coming out this year. I personally don't have anything. I'm mostly busy working on the Rolling Cane archive and studying. I just study a lot. Studying what exactly? Like mostly math these days. Oh, for DSP because I'm kind of like I write the software from the ground level up. Oh, whenever I'm doing my own stuff, that's where my head has been at for quite a while. So that portends there will be stuff once you figure out the math. I don't know.
It's really hard math.
I tend my way. I study, and then I do make sound in order to test these studies. Sometimes that then tells me, oh, why don't you make something out of this? Yeah. I haven't had that feeling for a long time. I've enjoyed the studying and then hearing what that studying sounds like. Yeah. It really only when sometimes it just tells me, oh, why don't you make something out of this? Yeah. Lately, I don't feel like it. Okay. I just, yeah. Yeah, but it's very important for me for the Rolling Cane archive to survive. So, I mean, I think David Watchman, he's like one of my earliest superheroes. Oh, okay. And I'm very grateful to be able to be part of the team that's saving his music. You were commissioned to do this? No. Oh. there's no money involved in these things. This is a personal pursuit. This is yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Very nice. Yeah. Jim, I think I know the answer, but maybe I'm wrong. Are you online per se? Not really. Okay. No. I've never ever been on Facebook. Facebook is a mystery to me. There's a Twitter that puts up like shows if I'm playing shows in Japan. What's it called? Steam Room Live. Is that you? Well, I've never tweeted anything. You know, it's just like retweets of like the club's twit. Is that the word? Tweets. The tweets. Tweets. Okay. So if I were to say, let's just say for the sake of argument, that when this comes out, I'll do my best to spread the word and promote it. Yeah, Steam Room Live is the only like SNS oriented thing that exists for me. Okay, so if I tag that, there's a minute chance it might retweet it and say, "Listen to Jim." Oh yeah, no. Yeah. Okay, all right. Just asking. I don't know why I'm asking. I just want to know if you're online. But it sounds like you're a bit. It's you keep it at arm's reach. Is someone managing it for you? No. I mean, I do it, but I don't do any tweets. I don't make comments or talk to people or anything. Yeah.
You rely on all of us to do the work, and you just press one button.
It's really weird because, and again, I think David will vouch for me for this. I was into computers really, really early.
Yeah.
And like I was on ARPANET, and I was, like in high school, I managed to get to go to this college. So I was really, really into computers of the future at a really young age. And like, all those artists, like it's not Peter Kubelka. It might be Peter Kubelka and all these. And at a very young age, I was disillusioned by the internet.
Yeah, fair enough. You were onto something there.
Yeah.
And so I've never engaged with the reality it became, because I really was into the reality it was supposed to be. So it's weird, but yeah, I'm not really involved with online stuff.
No, that's fair. That's totally fair. No, I appreciate that, and I will try to tag that Twitter account nonetheless, and David, wherever you are as well. At this point, I wonder if we can go out on a song from We Have Dozens of Titles, and I don't mean to start a debate, but I'll ask one of you to pick the song, and the other one can dispute it or agree wholeheartedly. Let's see what happens.
How long is your show?
It can be as long as I want. It's on the internet, which is great. I just want to say the internet's wonderful. You can do whatever you want. Whatever Jim was saying.
I like the internet.
The internet's okay. It's a total freedom. I can do whatever I want. David, if you can pick a song from this collection for us to go out on, can you tell us why it came to mind? Or first of all, can you do that, please?
Sure.
And if so, tell us why the song you've chosen came to mind.
Yeah, I would choose the live version of The Seasons Reverse because, after this heavy conversation, like it's a way for us to ride off into the sunset.
Okay, was it that heavy? I didn't mean to make it that heavy.
No, not at all. I don't know. I'm trying to be funny. Isn't this a comedy podcast? This is my attempt at being funny. Yeah,
it is. I enjoy this song very much. Jim, are you okay with this choice?
Sure.
Okay. David, is there anything you want to tell us about it in terms of your memory of it being laid down? It's a live version, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's a live version. I think that I hadn't written the lyrics at this point. We were just working on it,
Oh, okay.
And yeah. It's funny, yeah. No, when this was the first track streaming from the record, a friend contacted me and said that he almost had a seizure. Just like listening to it, like waiting for the voice to come in and the lyrics start waiting and waiting and waiting. Yeah. So.
But, in a way, that's a very Gastr thing.
Yeah, totally.
There's now a 10-minute intro version.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here it is now from the beautiful new collection. We Have Dozens of Titles. This is a live version of The Seasons Reverse, and it's one of its earliest forms, I suppose. This is by Gastr del Sol. Jim, David, tremendous pleasure to have you on this show and to get a chance to have you join me. It really means a lot. I can't tell you how much it means to me exactly, but I'm going to try. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I wish you the best luck in the future. Thanks again.
Right back at you. Thank you so much. All right.
Have a great evening.
It's a microphone.
C'est quoi ça?
Oh, what time?
Non, mais ça.
This?
Ouais.
It's a microphone. I'm recording you blowing off firecrackers. Is it okay? Is it okay if I record you setting off the firecrackers? I don't know what time it is. Sorry.
Vous partez quand?
I'm sorry?
Vous partez quand? Arrête.
No, keep go.
Hein?
Keep blowing them up.
D'Angleterre, vous êtes? D'anglais?
I only speak English. I'm sorry.
That was previously unreleased and now new music by Gastr del Sol. Very, very lovely to connect with David and Jim. I hope you enjoyed that. It meant a lot to me to have them on, and I am happy with where we went. And if you didn't know much about them, I would think you do by now. So thanks again to David and Jim for talking to me about their history together and this wonderful new release. We have dozens of titles. This is the 877th episode of Creative Control, which is now part of the Lionsgate Sound podcast network. I know many of you who follow the show know for years I've been saying I'm on the Entertainment One podcast network. Well, I got an email earlier this week and it said we're no longer the Entertainment One podcast network, we're the Lionsgate Sound podcast network. And I said, all right. And so that's what it is. It's now part of the Lionsgate Sound podcast network, and the show is still available wherever it is you get your podcasts. And if you can't find an episode you're looking for, if you want to learn more about me and sign up for my monthly newsletter, you can at vishkhanna.com. Also, click on the hyperlink text that says follow Vish online to do just that. I'm on some of the social media stuff that Jim O'Rourke doesn't know much about. Most importantly, though, I'd ask you to visit patreon.com/creative control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. As I said at the top of the show, any amount you can afford is very generous if you're willing to support the show. I will say I mentioned a monthly newsletter, but for $1 a month, you get my weekly newsletter, which is primarily about what's coming up on the show each week, but sometimes I ramble about things, and it's a little newsletter. So yeah, right from $1 up, you're getting something, and then $4 gets you ad-free, some ad-free episodes. $6 gets you every single ad-free episode. You don't miss a single one. $10, you enter random prize pack draws. There's a whole bunch of perks and tiers. And then you can go higher. If you're some sort of wealthy arts benefactor and you want to support the show in a more substantive way, hey, no one's stopping you. In fact, please head over to patreon.com/creative control and show me what you got. Thank you so much for your support. I also want to thank the wonderful Alberta record retailer Blackbird Music. Bricks and mortar locations in Edmonton and Calgary, Alberta, but you can order stuff directly and they'll send it to your house over at their website, blackbird.ca. Also want to thank some independent businesses, Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Ontario, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario, for their in-kind support for this show. Jim Guthrie was referenced on this episode, and you should learn more. You can learn more about Jim at jimguthrie.org. And finally, thank you for listening to this episode with Gastr del Sol. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll subscribe to this podcast or follow it and leave nice ratings and reviews on your pod platform there. Tell your friends all about the show. And otherwise, I just hope you do well in life. And thanks for listening. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.